Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Unplugged Woodworkings podcast. So, I haven't really been able to do a great deal. Plenty of good intentions and plenty of plans for this year. But I haven't really been up to a great deal. I was actually planning on having a van by now and kind of getting around to converting it, but obviously I haven't found a van. So I have got a couple of things I want to get out of the way before I do start some of the other projects. I'm probably gonna be the table or my kitchen island, whichever I decide to do. I've been fretting and talking about it for such a long time to absolutely everybody. You know, people are starting to think I'm lying about this table and stuff, because I talk about it so much, and I really need to do it. So that's probably going to be something you'll be seeing in the near future, I'm guessing. So what impressed me? So this is actually a mobile bench, and it's geared towards power tools. I know there's some people that follow us and they do actually use power tools, and there's quite a lot of people that are kind of how would you call it, maybe hybrid woodworkers, where they use a bit of both. Regardless of that, this bench is pretty cool. Obviously it's bog standard mobile bench. It's got casters on. The casters do actually retract into the wheel base, and obviously, make the bench steady. Multiple drawers. Some of the drawers actually pull out, and it looks to be kind of the sleds. So you pull the drawer out, and the drawer kind of is a sled. The drawers, one or two of the drawers actually look like supports for outfeed tables, which I thought was a really nice design, a nice feature. It's table saw. It's got a router table. You can actually set up a miter saw on there, so it's quite if you're actually going to build, it's kind of bang for buck or bang for the space that you worked in. When you are actually using power tools, I think this could be something that would really get you by. In fact, it would get you more than just by. It's really worth a look for anyone that's kind of in that situation where they're actually looking at the options. I dare say this could be adopted more for kind of hand tools. I would kind of hazard a guess, but obviously you would lose some of the functionality. Obviously outfeed tables and whatnot, you're kind of not going to need so many tables. Outfeed tables, of course, I'm talking about there. But yeah, I'll leave a link to that. That was on Instagram. I do believe he actually done a YouTube series. I might actually check the YouTube series out, because it's just so, what's the word I'm looking for here? I can't think of the correct word to describe it, but it's just it's ingenious. It's very, very, very functional, which that's something that I like. It doesn't matter if it's kind of a piece of furniture or a workbench or whatever. I just like functionality. So today I want to talk about saws. I actually got a message earlier today from a guy named Nick. He messages us from time to time on Facebook, which I don't really do a lot on Facebook now for various reasons. But anyway, he did messages, and it was regarding saws. It was regarding resawing. So I did obviously reply to him and kind of point him in the right direction. So it kind of prompted today's podcast, I'm going to talk about saws. I'm just going to go over a few things. Some of the things you might know, some of the things you might not know, the different types, different characteristics of different saws, so on and so forth. So, obviously there's a lot of different types. I am going to go into some of these, but primarily, at least for me anyway, there's kind of the two types that people will be able to relate to, and that's pretty much a Western style saw and an Eastern style saw. So basically, what it tends to be, the Western often push. I think most of them are push. So when I say push, I mean they'll actually cut on the push stroke, and the Eastern style, or at least the Japanese style, are pull saws, and they will cut on the pull. And another saw that kind of mingles in between the two types, or all of the two cultures, the East and the West, is a frame saw. I don't actually know the full history of frame saws, but to my knowledge, I should say, the Japanese variation or style, which they are kind of pretty much the same as the Western style, they will cut on the push, which is quite peculiar considering all the rest of the Japanese style, or at least the ones I've come across. I could be very wrong with this. I'm no expert with Japanese saws, but from the Japanese saws I have purchased, I've purchased quite a few Japanese saws. The wooden frame saw tends, or is the only one that I know of that cuts on the push. Now, you could turn this around and you could actually, use it as a pull saw, but, the demonstrations I've seen by Japanese craftspeople, they've been pushing it, which kind of was a bit weird for me considering all the other saws were pull. So, going into the saws a little bit more, I'm going to start with a Ryobi saw. So, most of you will know what a Ryobi saw is. Ryobi saw is a double-edged saw. One side is for cross-cutting and the opposite side is for ripping. So, obviously, because it's a pull saw, you can get away with the thickness of the blade, being very thin, because when you're actually pulling, as you're cutting, this actually creates tension in the blade itself. So, whereas if you were, let's for argument's sake, if you were ripping with a Western saw, the Western saws do tend to be of thicker gauge for obvious reasons, because if you're pushing, you do need to have some rigidity, because if a Western saw was as thin as some of the Japanese saws, you would just end up bending or snapping the blade in two, which obviously you don't want to do. So, something else to note about the Ryobi saw, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but there's actually different blades, for different processes, which kind of was something I wrote in the message to Nick, today. So, there is different lengths of the saw, and there's also different thicknesses of the saw, and there's some different, how can I put this, different, teeth per inch, I think would be the correct way to say this. So, currently, in my collection, I have a couple of Ryobi saws. There are all a couple of handles. So, at the moment, the two handles occupy the two regular sizes, rather, they're both same size or the regular size, which everyone knows, and I think that's about 230 millimeters, or it might be 210 millimeters in length, the blade size. So the two that I've got, the first one, that actually is a little bit wider, although it's the same length as the other one. So the one that's wider, that's kind of just general purpose, or at least its sole is in as a general purpose saw. Although I do use a general purpose, but it does stretch beyond general purpose. But the kerf is slightly thicker on that one. I should have probably measured or even looked up the information for this, but it is slightly thicker. So it is slightly more rigid, and this is noticeable, or at least it is to me when I'm using it. So also the teeth, there's less teeth per inch, which can actually give you a bit of a coarse cut or a coarse cut. But with it being a Japanese saw, I do tend to find that the Japanese saws will give a finer cuts. It's just how it is. People will argue that fact, but it's my experience that they do cut finer. So the other blade, that is slightly thinner in thickness, and it is slightly thinner in width, although it's the same size and length. So this blade is sold as a cabinet maker saw. Obviously there's more teeth per inch. Funnily enough, the rip portion of this, actually, it's super quick. I find it to be quicker with the cabinet maker saw than it is with the general purpose saw. For whatever reason, I've never really looked kind of into why. I just know that is, like, that's basically, it is what it is sort of thing. Cross cutting, obviously there's more teeth per inch. This will cut like really finely. It's because of this saw I actually stopped making knife falls when I'm actually ripping when I'm actually cross cutting material. I've got components and I'm cross cutting them to size. It's not very often now that I use a knife fall. For myself, there's no need for it. Obviously this would be different if I was using a Western saw, the likes of like a panel saw. I have actually got a Western panel saw, and when I do use it, it is kind of used predominantly for cross cutting. But obviously this does leave splinters or bloat, if you will, on the back side. Obviously because the teeth are bigger. The Japanese style teeth tend to be a lot littler, more of an S, if you like. So this saw you do need to be more cautious with the tracking. When you're tracking the line, because it is so flexible, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's more of a bad thing when you're just starting to learn how to use this style of saw. The good thing about it, as I've just said, it is quite thin and flexible. So basically this means you can cut arches, not necessarily arches, curves, because that would be the external of it. Yeah, I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, you could cut curves with this. You can actually cut circles to a degree, maybe 2 foot in diameter. Circles, maybe like a small coffee table, etc. So they are good like that. So the other blade I have actually got is a saw a blade that's sold as a Resaw. So and it does exactly that, and it's absolutely awesome. When I was actually messaging Nick today, I did actually tell him my first kind of thing that I discovered with it. I had a lot of cross-cutting to do. I was limited for time, so I couldn't basically order the thickness of the wood I wanted. So I had to resaw. After kind of doing a couple of these, it was taking us nearly 50 minutes to an hour to cut this, to resaw this board. And it was just an absolute nightmare. You can't imagine, how tearing this is, how out of breath I got with this. So for us to order the wood, it was going to take somewhere in the region, I think it was like 2 weeks, or I could get online and order this saw, which was going to come in a couple of days. So obviously I thought it's worth a try. So I bought the saw, and it took the 50 minutes of resawing and put that down to 15 minutes. It sounds a little bit unbelievable, but that is what happened. So you can imagine I was absolutely over the moon, and it was worth every single penny. So I'm going to jump over a little bit to Western saws. Primarily, I want to talk about splines. So a spline on a Western saw, that's pretty predominant. There might be a lot of people who don't woodwork kind of know what I'm talking about as soon as I kind of explained it, or all they would know what a spline is without knowing what a spline is. So for anyone that doesn't know what a spline is the thick piece of metal that runs along the top of a saw, predominantly a Western style saw, although there is, Japanese saws that do have splines. And what this is for, this is to strengthen the blade. Obviously, when you're pushing with a Western style saw, you will get the flex. It's just the nature of it. So in order for you to use a finer or a smaller gauge steel for the saw blade to produce a finer curve, say maybe when you're cutting the likes of dovetails or cutting the shoulders on tenons, anything like that, it is better for you to have a finer curve, and finer teeth. You're going to get better results with that. And so that's what the spline is for. Obviously the spline can get in the way of certain tasks, and you're all limited to it. You're all limited by it or that. Not in a massive way, but sometimes it can be a little bit limiting. So the only other place I've seen it kind of with Japanese saws is, or at least all I can think of at the moment, is dovetail saws. So the dovetail saw, the Japanese dovetail saw I have is it's very, very, very thin gauge steel for the saw blade. I'm not sure the gauge of it, but it's super, super thin. It's like absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's so thin that when I actually cut the dovetails, what I've actually had to start doing is the waste material that's going to be removed with the coping saw, which is my preferred method. The coping saw actually, the blade of the coping saw actually struggles to get down the curve, and depending on the type of wood I'm using, this can sometimes happen with oak as well. When I'm twisting the saw as I'm cutting to kind of turn from a vertical to a horizontal cutting motion, I will actually damage the wood. So what I've had to start doing is putting extra curves in the waste material so I don't damage the sides of the dovetails. So obviously with it being so thin, the dovetail saw, Japanese dovetail saw, it's understandable that you will need, a spline to strengthen it up. And it's, the splines with the Japanese, dovetail saws, they actually do come apart. They're kind of not fixed in the same way that, a Western style saw is. I think like a Western style saw is like kind of, folded. The spline is actually folded onto the steel, and it's hammered down and however they make that. I think they do it like that. I could actually be wrong. But with the Japanese style, so the whole thing comes apart, which is just as well for me, considering the way I actually store it. So I actually take the thing apart, and it lives in me caddy. You wouldn't even know it was there unless I actually told you. Just by looking at it, you wouldn't realise it was there. Another interesting thing, I actually had to look this up today because I didn't actually know what it was called. So this is called, and this is on me Western style rip. So it is called a breasted tooth line. And as I said, I had to look this up because I didn't know what the actual technique on the saw was called, and not the technique, the actual shape of the tooth line, is probably a better way to describe it. So it's got a very, very, very slight, what you would consider maybe an arc, going from the end of the saw to the start of the saw blade, or the start of the teeth line. So it is very, very slight, and this actually is something I haven't never seen before until I actually bought the saw. I've owned the saw for maybe like 5 years, something in that region, and I've never seen it before. I've never seen it in, the likes of markets when I've been to flea markets and I'm looking at saws, cause I do tend to look at the saws to see if there's anything decent there worth buying, whether it be Western or Japanese. And I've never seen a breasted saw, a breasted tooth line roller on any of the saws. So it might actually be quite interesting to see, the history of that, or whether it's just like kind of an in-house thing. But it might be interesting to look that up. Now, the thing behind this, an educated guess at least on my behalf, is that it works with the body mechanics, and when you're actually cutting, you can actually feel this, because when you cut with a saw, especially when you're ripping, or at least when I rip, I get into a bit of a rhythm. And you won't actually, just the body mechanics, you won't force down in a straight line. You'll get your angle, say, let's just say 45 degrees for argument's sake. You won't stay at 45 degrees when you're cutting with a rip saw. It's just the whole mechanics of it, the body mechanics of your skeletal structure. You will not stay in a straight line. It will be a slight arc. Like a lot of things in the body, when you're moving your joints through space, you will move in some sort of arc. Well, even though it looks straight, you will be moving in some sort of an arc. So when you're using the saw, you can actually feel it, and it does actually feel better to have that, rather than to use a straight tooth line. For anyone that can kind of try this out, or, can kind of get the use of one of these saws with, a breasted tooth line, I would recommend it, just so you can have, the experience of using it, cause I think it's quite good. I also think it adds to, to the speed of the cut. And that saw in general, when it is sharp, and it is quite quite a fast saw when you're ripping. So now I'm going to talk about teeth just a little bit, because I'm not going to pretend I know a great deal about teeth. I know a little bit about, teeth and whatever else. So I'm going to go over that just a little bit. So the main difference, what most people will know between cross-cutting and the rip cuts, is the way that it's filed, and obviously the way the teeth are shaped. So, when you're sharpening a rip saw, you will go across the blade at 90 degrees. That's just what it is. And the sharpening of a rip saw, or at least for me, is a lot quicker. It's a lot easier. It's just a lot less faff. What I will tend to do when I am actually sharpening the rip saw, by the way, I will only sharpen the Western style rip saws. The Japanese style rip saws, or at least the ones I get, have disposable blades, so obviously there's no need to do that. But one of the things I will do when I've actually sharpened the saw, I will actually touch the very top of the tooth. So, I'll actually file that ever so slightly. I think I've demonstrated this on maybe on YouTube, if not definitely Instagram. It's only ever so slightly. To be honest, you're probably better off doing this with like a diamond stone. You can get those diamond stones that are like kind of, the same size as, the old pocket combs, like a kind of, like a paddle, like a hand paddle sort of thing. That's the kind of size, they're only really small. You're probably better off doing that, with one of those types. It does make a difference, 100% it makes a difference. It makes a notable difference. If you don't do this and you have a try of it, you will notice a difference if you've done it correctly. So, cross-cutting, obviously this is, or at least the teeth are filed, differently. The teeth are filed at, not 90 degrees. There is different angles they are kind of filed at, rather. You can kind of get a bit of a cross between cross-cutting and rip-cutting. You can kind of maybe get away if you file the teeth at maybe 10 degrees sort of way. I mean, if you're just filing for or sharpening for cross-cutting, there is different angles. I'm not really going to go into the angles because there's different people with different ideas, so I'm kind of not going to go there. To be honest with you, I don't even know the angle of my panel saw. Whatever the angle is, I just follow that now. I'm really not 100% what the angle is, So, obviously, with the rip saw, at least the one I've got, that's 4.5 teeth per inch. So, that's, as it is, it's 4.5 teeth every inch. So, You'll find in Western saws, at least, the teeth that are closer together, more teeth per inch, if you like, they tend to be a little bit slower, or at least in my experience, they are, although obviously you can still use them. But I do tend to find when the teeth are further apart, it gives the material more room to fall out, if that makes sense. If you're using if you're using, rip saws or whatever that are, the teeth are closer together, it does tend to clog up, a lot quicker. Same again in my experience, but with the rip saw with the 4 teeth per inch, with there being such a gap when you're actually pulling the saw out of the material, and then you're loading your elbow up to push the saw back into the material. When you're pulling it out, the material, most of the material's just falling out because there's so much of a gap. Whereas when you're using a saw where the teeth are closer together, in my experience, the material tends to stick there. So when you're forcing, or not forcing, but when you're pushing the saw back in, it doesn't cut as well, because all the teeth, or all are in between the teeth, are full of, sawdust basically. So it does, what's the word I'm looking for here? It doesn't cut as well, if that makes sense. Certain materials will be worse. I mean, like, like kind of oily woods, like sappy woods, like the pines, the pines can be quite notorious. When you actually are cutting, with a Ryobi saw, that's a really good, what's the word I'm looking for here? Example. It's a really good example, because the Ryobi saw, rip cutting, it works really, really well. In my opinion, I think it works better than a Western style saw. But the problem being that the teeth are a lot closer together, and they'll clog up quickly. So I have actually got to, after so many strokes or pulls, if you like, I've actually got to remove it out of the material altogether and just run me thumb and first finger down the saw. And obviously that gets rid of all the excess material or the sawdust out of the teeth. And going back to the Western style saw, me 4.5 teeth per inch, that doesn't happen. So, take what you will with that statement. So, cross cutting, as a rule of thumb, the more teeth per inch, the cleaner the cut will be, the more precise the cut will be. The less teeth per inch, obviously the more sloppier the cut will be. And it kind of just depends, kind of what you're looking for. I mean, the panel saw I've got, that when it's sharp, that's really, really quick, for rough cutting, and sometimes I will use it, if I'm kind of rough cutting material to length. I might need to break a board down, to get it, roughly the size, whatever. These might be big boards, there might be wide boards and long boards, so, it's part of the process, breaking the board down. But, for quickness, I sometimes will use the Western style saw, your panel saw. But the problem with that, it's not a problem, it does become more of a problem, if I'm wanting accurate cuts, because I will get splinters on the back end. And that's solely because the teeth are just further apart. Obviously I can alleviate this by putting a knife hole in, and the problem solved, but I'm lazy and I don't like to put a knife hole in unless it's absolutely essential. And lately the only time it's been essential for myself is when I'm cutting, some type of joint, whereas, a knife hole's a given. You have got to use knife holes when you're cutting joints. So as I was saying, the more teeth there is per inch, the finer the cut will be. So one of the finest saws I've got is a flush saw. It's very flexible, which it is okay, but you have got to be careful with it being so flexible. but the good thing about it is there's like a load of teeth per inch. I've no idea how many teeth per inch, but it is the saw with the most teeth per inch that I own. And what I've been doing for some time now is actually using it to cut shoulder lines. And a lot of the time when I've kind of got it now that when I am using that saw, I don't always use it, but the majority of the time I do use it for cutting shoulders. And when I'm cutting shoulders, the majority of the time I won't have to use a chisel. It's just such a fine cut with it. You don't need to follow up with the chisel. That's providing that your shoulder is square or you've undercut it. I do kind of go for like square. Sometimes it does get undercuts, but most of the time, it is pretty close to square. And I don't have to worry about it. But that's one of the good things about the flush saw. Teeth set. Really don't tend to do a lot of teeth setting. I tend to find that teeth setting lasts a really long time. You'll know when you need to do it. What I will say is don't overset your teeth. If you overset your teeth, your saw will work very poorly. As I found out when I first started, messing around with saws, meaning when I first started, delving into sharpening them and stuff, I was actually oversetting them, and yeah, kinda, it doesn't really go down too well. But Paul Sellers method, you set your teeth and then you'll put a hammer into a vise and you'll run your saw down it, and as you do, you've got another hammer in your hand and you actually take some of the set off. As I said, you need very, very little sets. If you can see the set a great deal, it's probably too much. It's ever so slight, the sets, or at least how I do it, and I get really good cuts with the set I use. Obviously I don't tend to, I don't have to use sets when I'm using the Japanese saws. I don't have to worry about that, although occasionally if I'm not paying attention, I have actually bent a couple of teeth before, so put too much set on them for whatever reason, whatever I've been doing. So occasionally you will have to use a hammer to reset them. It's not really a big deal. It's quite easy to do something like that. So I think I'm going to call it a day. I've blabbered on enough about saws. So, as always, if you've got any questions or you would like us to talk about something, I'd be most grateful for the questions and for the ideas. As I said, and I've said this quite a few times, sometimes it's just so hard for us to get ideas for things to talk about. So although we all know there's lots and lots to talk about, but sometimes my mind just goes blank. And to be honest, lately when I've been actually putting these podcasts out, if I haven't been putting the podcasts out, lately it's been because I haven't had anything to talk about. So, if you do actually enjoy listening to the podcasts, give us some suggestions of what things I can talk about, and it would be most appreciated. A massive thank you, as always, to everyone that follows me, especially on Instagram. My Instagram's growing really big and fast. It's crazy. I'm up to nearly 7,000 people on my Instagram. Absolutely crazy. Just a silly guy, woodworking on a room workbench in his back garden, so, a massive thank you to everyone that started following, who's been following from the beginning, so on and so forth. Thank you very much. Until the next time, I shall speak to you guys later.